Hey guys, in this video we're going to make a small shelf tool to show you how to do this and to give you a few more code examples on how to use Python in Houdini. Sometimes when I do my own projects, I will create a mantra node and a camera node with certain settings that I like to use. For my own small projects, they tend to often be the same. So rather than having to lay them down every time manually, I did a little shelf tool for myself that does it for me. Of course, if you're in a larger production environment, there might be much bigger setups that you might want to have created from a shelf tool. This is where a shelf tool like this may come in handy. So for example, if I want to drop down a camera node, I would have to go tab, camera, choose all my settings, go to render, change settings there, go to view, maybe set it to HD instead. Or if you want to render, we could need a mantra node of course. So if we go to out, then we would type mantra, then there's all these settings you can choose. Frame range, rendering objects, ray tracing of course, micropolygon physically based rendering, or just physically based rendering. We're going to write a little script that does it all for us. I have it already here, but let's create one together. Let's go ahead and start a new one. We make a new shelf. If you haven't got your own shelf yet, you can add a new shelf from the plus button. You can give it a name, a label. Let's call it my shelf 2. I had no idea what to call it, so this works. And type in the label as well. We can go right click and say new tool. This gives you a few options here. You can give the tool a name, let's say a rendering setup, and here we can type in the label. You can also pick an icon for your tool from the library if you want. In the script tab, we're going to write some code to lay out those nodes for us. First, I'm going to create a variable called renderCam, and then I'm going to say who.node/obj.createNode cam. And I can tell you this name because I found this out before from the AskCode function. Let's apply this and hit accept and see what happens. It creates a camera as we would expect at object level. It's just called cam1 and it hasn't really done anything else than just create that camera, but of course I wanted to have certain name so that I can recognize it when I pick it from my camera view, and then I want to have different settings. So let's just go ahead and delete that and go back into our tool. Right click the shelf tool and say edit tool. I want to type renderCam.setName. This is a function that lets you set the name of the renderCam. As you can see, we've added the renderCam node to that variable called renderCam. This means that we can set its name by calling the variable renderCam. Then .setName, and we can type renderCam in there. Now I also want to create a mantra node. So we can create another variable and name it renderIFD. And we can say who.node, and instead of object level, we have to create it out level. So type /out in between the brackets. Then we can type .createNode IFD, and that's the reason I called it renderIFD. IFD would be what we pass into createNode as a string to have Houdini create a mantra node for us. Again, I found out a mantra node is called IFD by running the node through the AskCode function. Now we can call the node by typing renderIFD.setName, and I will call it something obvious like mantra renderHD. If we now hit apply and accept, we should at object level find our camera, now called renderCam instead of cam1. And in out, we should find a mantra renderHD node, exactly as we specified. But of course we haven't set any of these parameters yet, so let's do that. Let's remove the mantra node for now, go back to object level and find the renderCam. So for example in view, we can set a resolution. If we just hover over it, we can see that there is a parameter called resx and a parameter called resy. So now I want to show you how you can set these through Python. Let's remove this and go back to our tool. Right click it, edit tool, and go back to the script. So we already have renderCam.setName, but we can also do renderCam.parm. This is the way to access a parameter on a node. Normally we would go who.node, and inside there we type the node name like obj something, and then we can say .parm, which is where we type the name of the parameter, for example parmx. But we have to be specific on which node to set the parameters on, which is why we hook them up to a variable like renderCam, or a variable like render_ifd. Let's go ahead and type renderCam.parm, and we've seen that the parameters we want to set are called resx and resy. So I'm going to say resx and then simply .set, which is simply another function that lets us set the value of the parameter. I want the value to be 1920, and we're going to do the same thing again, rendercam.parm, and in this case we're going to say resy .set 1080. Actually, they're numbers, right? So we shouldn't pass them in as strings, but as integers.
So let's remove the quotation marks.
Now if we accept and we hit our little tool, if we found our render cam, we should see that its parameters are set to HD resolution, 1920 by 1080, right? So that's how you can set parameters with Python. Let's remove the camera and mantra nodes again and go back to our code to set the parameters on the mantra node as well. We can type in render_ifd.parm.set. In parm, we name the parameter that we want to set. So in this case, we want to set the camera parameter because we need to hook the mantra node up to the camera we just created. That parameter is called camera, and we're going to set the path to the camera, which is /obj/rendercam. After all, we've just created a camera named rendercam at object level, which is exactly what we're passing into the set function. And then we can do renderifd.parm.set again. I want to set the type of rendering to physically based rendering, so in that case we call the parameter vm_renderEngine. That's what you get when you move over the parameter on the node with your mouse. And we're going to set it to PBR ray trace. Let's just accept that and run our tool. Now in out, let's have a look. For example, now in rendering, when you mouse over rendering engine, we find vm_renderEngine. That's how I knew what the parameter is called. But this is a drop-down menu, and whatever you change it to, it doesn't show you a name change depending on the option you choose. I found that out by going through the help documentation, and then if you go through it, at some point you'll find it. I already know that we've got to look for something called PBR, so let's search for that. Hit Ctrl F and type in PBR. So now here, for example, you have micropoly, ray trace, PBR micropoly, and PBR ray trace, and this is what we've typed in. So sometimes you might have to do a bit of searching before you find exactly what to set, or what you need to call, if you want to set a particular setting. So this is all set up for us now. Of course, you can go back into the code to have it automatically set vmsample X or vmsample Y, any name, any path. Maybe you can change the frame range automatically, like 0 to 100 for test renders, for example. It doesn't really matter, it's all up to you. This is basically how you can set up a little shelf tool for yourself to work with. And of course, it's just a very small example, but hopefully this gives you an idea of how to work with shelf tools and how this can make your life easier, especially on a larger scale. All right, let's move on to the next example.